The chamber smelled of wax and sweat, the air heavy with fear. Flickering candles cast trembling shadows across the walls of Pembroke Castle as the screams of a girl echoed through the corridors. It was January 1457, the dead of winter, and a storm rattled the Welsh coast. Inside, in a room not meant for childbirth, a child lay dying while trying to give birth herself. Her small frame strained against a task meant for grown women, her voice breaking with cries that seemed far too young to belong in a birthing chamber. She was only 13 years old. Her name was Margaret Beaufort. And on that night, her agony would give England a dynasty. The midwives feared for her life. Hours dragged on. Her bones resisted, her narrow hips refusing to let the child pass. Blood ran across the bed. The girl cried for God, for mercy, for her mother. The women around her prayed that at least the baby might survive, though it seemed neither mother nor child could endure much longer. And yet against all odds, both lived. The boy, frail, small, and gasping, was named Henry. The mother, pale and shattered, would carry scars invisible to the eye, but carved into her soul forever. That child would grow into Henry VII, the first Tudor king, but his crown was bought with his mother's suffering. Margaret was born on May 31st, 1443, into the powerful Beaufort family. She was of royal blood, descended from John of Gaunt, son of Edward III, though through a line once barred from succession. From her earliest breath, she was wrapped in the ambitions of others. Her father, John Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, had lived a troubled life. Failed military campaigns and political disgrace weighed heavily upon him. And when Margaret was only a year old, he died, some said by his own hand. That left her not only fatherless, but also immensely wealthy. She was his sole heir. In 15th century England, a rich orphaned girl was not a blessing, it was a curse. She became a prize to be won, a jewel that powerful men would fight to control. Before she could even walk, her fate was being negotiated in marriage contracts. At the age of 3, she was promised to John de la Pole, son of a great duke. Of course, she was too young to understand. To her, it was perhaps a ceremony, a new set of faces, a ribbon tied in her hair. But to the adults around her, she was a commodity. Her lands, her dowry, her bloodline, all of it a bargaining chip. Her childhood was gone before it began. England itself was in chaos. The Wars of the Roses, an endless feud between Lancaster and York, tore the kingdom apart. It was in this storm that Margaret's life unfolded. After her betrothal to de la Pole was annulled, she was placed under the guardianship of 2 men who would shape her destiny: Edmund and Jasper Tudor, half-brothers to King Henry VI. To them, she was not a child under their protection, but a means of advancing their family. Edmund Tudor saw her as his path to wealth and power. She was 12 when he claimed her as his wife. In medieval custom, marriages between children were not unusual. But there was an expectation that consummation would wait until the girl was older. Edmund ignored this, whether through ambition, greed, or indifference. He treated her as if she were already a woman, but she was not. She was a girl, small for her age, her body unready. Yet Edmund forced the marriage into its full reality. Within months, Margaret was pregnant. To call this marriage is to soften what it truly was: exploitation. Edmund's grasp of power was short-lived. The civil war between York and Lancaster consumed the land. Edmund was captured by Yorkist forces and died in prison of plague. He was 26. Margaret, his child bride, was 12 years old and already carrying his heir. She became both widow and expectant mother before she had even entered her teens. Pregnancy weighed heavily on her fragile body. She was small, barely able to carry the child, her steps uncertain under the growing burden. The danger was evident to all. Even her guardians must have known the risk. Yet the machinery of inheritance and lineage cared nothing for her health. Under Jasper Tudor's protection, she was moved to Pembroke Castle in Wales. There, in the biting cold of January, she faced the ordeal that nearly killed her. The birth of Henry Tudor was long and harrowing. The midwives knew the girl was too narrow-hipped, too slight, but there was no choice but to proceed. The screams of labor echoed through the stone halls. Some said her survival was a miracle. Henry was born weak and Margaret was left broken. Her body never recovered. The injuries from that night scarred her for life, ensuring she would never bear another child. 13 years old, a widow, a mother. Permanently damaged by the weight of dynastic ambition, her world narrowed to one purpose: the survival of her son. In the years that followed, Margaret became fiercely protective of Henry. He was not only her child, but her legacy, her reason for living, her chance to redeem the suffering she had endured. She hovered over him with a devotion that could seem excessive, even suffocating. But how could it be otherwise? She had risked her life for him, lost her girlhood for him, endured humiliation and trauma for him. Without Henry, what meaning did her pain hold? As England's wars raged on, Henry became both target and prize. The Yorkists hunted him, the Lancastrians rallied to him, and Margaret worked tirelessly behind the scenes, arranging alliances, whispering in corridors, bending her will to ensure her son would one day claim the crown. Her determination was steel, forged in the furnace of her childhood suffering. Though Margaret remarried several times, those unions were political arrangements, not love matches. Her heart remained bound to Henry's fate. The trauma of her own early marriage lingered. She knew firsthand the horror of being used as a child, and in later years, when it came to her granddaughter Margaret Tudor, she tried to prevent the cycle from repeating. She argued against her being married off too young. She wanted to spare the girl what she had endured. But history is cruel. The dynastic games went on, and another child was thrust into a woman's role before her time. The pattern was unbroken. As Henry Tudor rose to prominence and eventually seized the throne as Henry VII, Margaret became more than his mother. She was his closest advisor. She wielded quiet but immense influence in court politics, maneuvering alliances, funding colleges at Cambridge, and shaping the intellectual and spiritual life of the realm. Yet no matter her outward power, the shadow of that night in Pembroke never left her. Every achievement, every victory of the Tudor dynasty was rooted in her suffering. Behind the grandeur of the Tudor rose lay a story of blood, coercion, and sacrifice. Margaret Beaufort has often been remembered as a pious matriarch, a political mastermind, the woman who secured the Tudor claim. All of that is true. But beneath the polished portraits and the marble tombs lies a harsher truth. She was a child who was exploited. She was a girl who nearly died to give England a king. She was a survivor of a system that valued wealth and bloodlines above human lives. Her story forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. The glory of dynasties is often built on the broken bodies of women and children, and Margaret's scars were not hers alone. They were carried forward into generations. Margaret Beaufort died in 1509, just days after her beloved son, Henry VII. She did not live to see her grandson Henry VIII crowned, but by then the dynasty she had sacrificed everything for was secure. Her patronage left lasting marks: colleges, religious houses, reforms. She was remembered as devout, intelligent, formidable. Yet perhaps her greatest legacy is the testimony of her own survival. She endured what should have destroyed her. She transformed trauma into determination, exploitation into influence, personal pain into dynastic power. But if we strip away the myth, what remains is the image of a 13-year-old girl, lying on a bed in a cold castle, bleeding and terrified, giving birth to a future king. The Tudor rose, so celebrated in history, grew from her suffering. Today, when we look back at Margaret Beaufort, we must see more than a founder of a dynasty. We must see the child who never had a childhood, the girl who bore the unbearable. Her story is not simply history. Around the world, even now, countless children are forced into marriages, made mothers before they are ready, their lives twisted by systems of power and control. Margaret's voice, though centuries old, still speaks for them. She reminds us that behind every throne, every crown, every symbol of glory, there may be a silent victim, and she warns us that greatness built on suffering always carries a hidden cost.